So I didn't think when I started this morning it'd be such a magnum opus, but I guess when I used to give it as a lecture, it went over an hour. So getting it into three chunks, each of which is less than 20 minutes, that's kind of an accomplishment. Let's see if I can keep this one under 20 minutes. There are three things I want to talk about. I want to talk about how uniqueness makes a difference, especially when it comes to link turns. Then I want to talk about how to kick out of an argument that has turns on it. And then finally, I want to talk about the concept of a clean turn. So to begin with, uniqueness. If you are affirmative and you want to win a link turn to a disadvantage, then what you need to do is you need to win that the disadvantage is not unique. You have to defeat uniqueness to the disadvantage. So the example that I use for this, let's say hypothetically that you're standing in front of your house and you're just hosing down the roof, just spraying water up on the roof of the house. And along comes your neighbor, and your neighbor doesn't understand the laws of nature very well, so your neighbor says, "Don't do that. Spraying water on your house will cause it to catch fire." Well, what you could very reasonably say is, no, spraying water on my house is not going to make it catch fire. As a matter of fact, spraying water on your house is how you put out a fire. But then your neighbor could point out, spraying water on your house only does good for it if the house is already on fire. So if the disadvantage is, right now your house is not on fire, what you're doing causes the house to catch fire, a house on fire is bad, destroys all your property, and endangers everybody inside of it, your neighbor is wrong on the link. As a matter of fact, your neighbor is so wrong that you can actually link turn it. Spraying water on the house is not going to cause it to catch fire. It's actually a good way to eliminate fire if the house is on fire. But your neighbor can point out that you cannot link turn a disadvantage that's unique. If your neighbor can win that in the status quo the disadvantage is not going to happen, then the fact that your plan does something constructive, that your plan prevents it, or your plan solves it, well, that's completely moot if it's already okay. So if someone runs a disadvantage against you and they say that the recovery in the United States economy is fragile, but if nothing comes along to derail it, it's going to build and we're going to go back into a period of growth. That's the status quo. Then they have some sort of link to what the plan does, and they say, you hurt the economy, and hurting the economy is bad. It tips us back into a recession, which spirals downward into a depression, an economic collapse, and that's bad, leads to all these horrible things. And you then try to link turn it, and you say, no, we actually help the economy. So now all the impacts to your disadvantage are advantages to the plan. Well, what they should say is, but we've already won that in the status quo, the economy is going to be okay. So you can't actually claim the impact to the disadvantage based on your link turn, because if the judge votes affirmative, you might be right, it would help the economy. But our argument is that if the judge votes negative, the economy doesn't need any help. It's going to be okay. A negative vote does not bring on the impacts of the disadvantage any more than an affirmative vote does. So your turnaround becomes nothing more than a takeout. It's like putting a Band-Aid on someone who doesn't have a cut. It doesn't do any good. Band-Aids are great when you're bleeding. They can stop the bleeding, but if you're not bleeding, they don't really do any good. So, the rule that you should remember is if you're trying to win the debate on a link turn, then you need to defeat the disadvantage's uniqueness. Now, if you're trying to win the debate on an impact turn, then you don't want to defeat the uniqueness. Because remember, a link turn is saying you prevent the bad thing that the disadvantage talks about, or you solve it. But the impact turn says that the bad thing the disadvantage talks about is not bad at all, it's actually good. So you want to say, in the status quo it's not going to happen, we cause it to happen, and it's a good thing. Because if the negative can say, the affirmative debated us on uniqueness, the affirmative said that the disadvantage is going to happen whether or not you vote for the affirmative plan, then their impact turn doesn't matter. The good thing is going to happen either way. So if dehydration is inevitable, we're completely out of water, it's such a hot day, well, not we're completely out of water, but it's such a hot day that even drinking water we're going to get dehydrated, plus being dehydrated is wonderful because you can hear the angels playing their harps. Well, then the fact that the affirmative causes us to become dehydrated, that's moot if we're going to be dehydrated either way, if it's inevitable. If voting negative, we wind up dehydrated. If voting affirmative, we wind up dehydrated. Then the impact turn doesn't matter. It's not a reason to vote for the affirmative. So, the rule is real simple. If you're link turning the disadvantage, if you're affirmative and you're link turning the disadvantage, be sure you make some arguments that the disadvantage is not unique. But if you're going to impact turn the disadvantage, and you want to lock the negative into that argument, if you want to just turn the argument, then don't dispute uniqueness. Grant the uniqueness, grant the link, and then say that their impact is a good thing. Now that's a pretty good segue into the discussion of how to kick out of an argument. What if you on the negative run 2 or 3 disadvantages, and to your surprise and to your horror, one of them is stirring up a hornet's nest? It's an issue that the affirmative has a lot to say about, it's an issue that they know very well, and they link turn it several different ways. So let's add a new hypothetical, because this hypothetical is going to set us up for talking about the last subject in this debate, the clean turn. Let's say that Bob wants to come along on our hike. But the problem is that Bob is just recovering from a nasty case of pneumonia. He's only been, his fever only broke a day or two ago, and he's getting stronger every day, but he's kind of weak. So the topic is now resolved that Bob should come along with us on our hike. And in the first affirmative constructive, the harm is Bob has been cooped up in the house for a long time, and he really wants to get outdoors. The inherency is he doesn't really right now have any opportunity to get outdoors. People are staying away from him because they've heard that he's sick and they don't want to catch it. And the solvency is we'll invite Bob along on our hike, and that'll get him out of doors and he'll feel a lot better. So the disadvantage then would be relapse. And the uniqueness would be in the status quo, Bob is going to get stronger and stronger. He's on bed rest. He's being well taken care of. He's not going to have a relapse if he continues what he's doing. The link is going out on a strenuous hike. He will overexert himself, and in my part of the world, it's also pretty cold and wet outside, so that's going to give him a chill, and that's very likely to topple him back into what he had before. And the impact is if he relapses, what he had before, pneumonia, is very dangerous. He's at risk of dying, plus they've had to treat it with very powerful antibiotics. And the more time he spends taking antibiotics, the greater the danger that he's going to develop a resistant strain, a superbug that nothing can treat, and then he's really up a creek. Well then, the affirmative might come back and might say, okay, link turn first. The exertion is good for him. What he actually needs is some light exercise, and we're not going to let him overexert himself. He'll be fine. Link turn, he's depressed from being cooped up inside all the time, and depression can actually impair the immune system. When there's a mind-body connection, and when you are so caught up in depression, you actually can get physically sick because of it. And let's say they link turn it a few other ways, and then they finally say, oh, and by the way, no impact. If he relapses, he's still got the antibodies from the first time he fought it off. It's likely to be milder the second time around. The first time it was dangerous because we didn't catch it until it was so far gone, but now people are watching him very closely. The doctor is calling him in for follow-up visits, so if there's a relapse, it won't be nearly as bad as the first time. Okay, what you as the negative can do, let's say those link turns sound pretty good to you and you're not really sure how to answer them, but you have a couple of other disadvantages other than relapse, and you want to go for those disadvantages instead. What you can do, especially if you have got an experienced judge who knows that you as the negative are going to try to narrow the debate, and you're going to have one or maybe at the most 2 offensive strategies at the end that you're going to focus upon. Even if you started more at the beginning of the debate, what you can do is you can strategically concede, agree with some of the affirmatives arguments to neutralize the turnaround. So maybe you grant the affirmatives impact takeout. You say they're right, a relapse wouldn't be that big of a deal. He's already being monitored by the doctors, so they would catch it early, and he's still got the antibodies from before. So every argument they make about how going on the hike is necessary to prevent a relapse, they themselves said that the relapse is not that big of a deal, so those turns don't amount to anything. Plus, we still are winning uniqueness, and they'll often phrase it as we control uniqueness. So in the status quo, if he continues to do what he's doing, if he stays on bed rest, he's going to get a little bit healthier every day. So voting negative, he's going to be fine. They could probably dispute that and say that their turn about him being depressed means in the status quo his health is going to get worse. But you might then dispute that and say, here are some more arguments why this disadvantage is unique. There are people who are coming and visiting him to help him not be depressed. There are people who are sending him over care packages. He knows that as soon as he's better, he gets to go and do something exciting. All these cut against the idea that he's depressed. In the status quo, he's going to be fine. And if you did that, then you've made the turns go away and you can focus on your other arguments. Now, it does mean that that relapse disadvantage is gone from the debate. But if you're debating a very skillful affirmative team, and if they've really got your number on that, it doesn't mean that the debate is over. It just means that you need to focus your attention someplace else. And if they have argued takeouts along with the turns, then you can grant some of those takeouts. Now, here's the danger. Here's how I'll phrase the rule. Figure out what kind of turn it is, and then grant the opposite kind of takeout. So in this case, the turns were link turns, so the fact that they also argued impact takeouts, grant the impact takeouts, and that gets you out of the link turns. But what young debaters will often do is they'll try to grant the same kind of takeout. They'll try to grant a link takeout and think that it makes the link turn go away. So if the affirmative were to say, no link, the hike is not going to cause him to have a relapse because we'll take it nice and slow and easy, and we'll watch him to make sure if he needs rest, we will take breaks, and we'll sit down and we'll have a drink of water. We'll make sure that it's not the level of exertion that would cause a relapse. Also, turn, he's getting depressed and needs to get out. Sometimes negatives who are inexperienced might hear, okay, there's a takeout there, and if it's a link takeout, then if I grant that, that means the link turn goes away. No, it actually strengthens it. I'm really not going to have to say that much about clean turns because I'm really kind of explaining them right now. Because if your argument originally was that the hike is likely to cause him to have a relapse, and they say, no, the hike is going to make him healthier, and if they say, it's not going to cause a relapse because we will go easy on him, we'll go easy on him, and the hike is going to make him healthier, those are consistent. Those work together. That turn becomes stronger. It's when they say, the hike will make him healthier, and he's not in any danger of becoming seriously sick. Those work against each other. They are neutralizing the impact of their turn if they also argue that the disadvantage itself doesn't have an impact. Now, it gets tempting to think that, well, I want to win my turns. I just won't ever argue an impact takeout if I'm also arguing a link turn. But that's not the way to proceed either. I mean, it depends from round to round. If you're very sure you're right about your link turns, then you do want to just link turn the disadvantage and not debate the impact of the argument, and that's called straight turning it. That's called locking the negative in and not giving them a way to kick the disadvantage out. But sometimes you'll try to link turn it and you'll find out that the negative is very good on this argument, and they can debate you on the link to the argument, and your turn, you're not likely to win your turn. So you want as many options as you can. So maybe you debate them on the link and on the impact and on the uniqueness, and you at least start the debate on each part of the disadvantage because you know they're very strong on that issue, and it won't develop until late in the debate which one you can actually overcome them, which one you have the stronger position on. It could be that your link turn is a little shaky and your explanation's not that good, but your impact takeouts are really, really good. And sometimes it's just that you really want them to kick out of this argument because you really know that if they focus on it and go for it, it's a weakness of yours. In the final round of the National Debate Tournament in 1989, my teammates from Baylor were on the negative, and we had run a Russia disadvantage, and Michigan couldn't find the arguments that they usually made to answer Russia. So they had to slap something together, and we in the audience all wondered, what in the world are they doing? Because they just said, no link, no link, no link. 3 quick no link arguments, and then they had 7 or 8 impact turnarounds all in a row, and we didn't find out until after the debate. They couldn't find their typical Russia front line. So they had put those together. They had made it so tempting to kick out of the Russia argument, so easy for us to do it. And we had other arguments in the debate. We had a politics disadvantage and an economics disadvantage, and we wound up winning on those, the combination of those two arguments on a 4-1 decision. But because they didn't want to debate us on Russia because they weren't on their usual arguments, they just set it up as a big, fat target. We'll make it easy for you to kick it out. And that's exactly what we did. Now, I've talked before about how grant the opposite kind of takeout, so let me turn that example around and talk about how if they've impact turned the argument, you can kick it out if they also made link takeouts. So, if I were to say, let's say my impact turn is, being sick is fun. I mean, being sick, you get a free vacation, you get to watch lots of DVDs, people come and take care of you. Well, let's say I also argued, plus the hike isn't going to make them sick, because the hike isn't going to make Bob sick, because we're going to watch Bob, we're going to keep an eye on him, and we're going to go slowly so he won't have a relapse. Well, if you're negative and you can't beat that impact turn, although that's not much of an impact turn, if you're negative and you want out of that argument, then you could just say, grant their argument that the hike with Bob will be nice and gentle and slow and he's not going to have a relapse. Which means their argument about how it's fun to be sick and you get to watch lots of DVDs and you get a free vacation and people send you care packages and stuff, that all goes away. They are not going to cause Bob to have a relapse, so he's not going to have the fun of being sick. Once again, if I argued an impact takeout along with my impact turn, if I said being sick is fun, free vacation, DVDs, care packages, and I also said, and there's no risk that Bob is going to be seriously sick because the doctors are monitoring it because he still has the antibodies from the first time when he was sick, those work together. The sickness isn't going to be very bad, and it is going to be good. So if the negative, being inexperienced or confused, says, there's a takeout, I'll grant that and it'll make the turn go away. No, that takeout is just going to strengthen that turn. So the rule one more time is, grant the opposite takeout. If they've impact turned your argument, but they also made a no-link argument, grant the no-link and it'll make the impact turn go away. If they've link turned the argument, but they've also argued an impact takeout, grant the impact takeout, and then the link, it's solving something that they've said is not a big deal. And you can agree with them that it's not a big deal, so solving it is not a big deal and doesn't help them win the debate. And I'll finally say, just to remind you of the first part of this talk, that if they say the disadvantage is non-unique, but then they impact turned it, you can grant that it's non-unique and the impact turn will go away. So if Joe is inevitably going to have a relapse, then the fact that being sick is fun is not a reason that Joe should go on the hike. Because if he goes on the hike, he'll have a relapse, but if he doesn't go on the hike, he'll have a relapse. And you can kick the disadvantage out just on the basis of the fact that it isn't unique. But you cannot do that if they've link turned the disadvantage. If Joe is going to have a relapse in the status quo, especially because he's depressed, but going on the hike will make him healthier, then that link turn will solve the non-uniqueness answer, and it will prevent the impact of Joe having a dangerous relapse and possibly dying. The last thing to talk about is a clean turn. And here what I'm saying is, when you argue a link turn or an impact turn, it's also very smart at the same time to argue the same kind of turn because it strengthens your argument. So if you're going to say that going on the hike, have I been saying Joe? I meant to say Bob. Started out Bob and it turned into Joe. At any rate, if you've been saying that going on the hike is going to make Bob healthier, it's good to say at the same time, and it won't make him sick. And if you're going to say that being sick is actually fun, you want to take out their original impact, because one of the things negatives can do, if they've decided they want to focus on a different disadvantage and they want to kick out of this one, but you've tried to not leave them any way to do so, they can just make a few more arguments to build up their original link. Let's say you tried to straight link turn the argument. You make uniqueness answers, and then you make the depression argument. Bob is depressed, and depression is going to lead him to a relapse, but going on the hike will help him not be depressed because he's cooped up. Well, what they can do is they can just pour it on, make 3 or 4 more arguments about their original link, but it's too strenuous, and if he's depressed being cooped up, then he'll be too excited to get outside, and he'll overexert himself, he'll run on ahead, he'll try to climb rock faces, and then they can say at the end of the debate, we're winning enough on our original link that it weighs against their link turn, at least enough to where they're not winning their link turn clearly, to where we can win on this disadvantage over here. That's one option that the negative always has when the affirmative is trying to straight turn something. The negative can go back and do a little job extending the original argument, not as much as they would if they were trying to go for it to win the debate, but at least build it up a little bit and say to the judge, our original explanation, our original argument competes with their turn argument enough that we edge them out on a different issue. So remember that on the negative, that's one option for kicking out of a disadvantage if you need to. And when you're on the affirmative, remember that not only if you're link turning it do you also have to win uniqueness, but if you're smart, you'll also argue takeouts to their original link so that your link turn has nothing to compete with. You've severed their original link. There's only your link turn. And the same if you want to impact turn it.
Debate them on their original impact. Don't just dump impact turns on it. Say something about the original impact so they have nothing to use as a counterbalance to your impact turn. So that's everything I have to say, starting all the way back with the difference between a takeout and a turn, then getting to how turns are strategic, the difference between a link turn and an impact turn, the danger of double turning yourself, why you need to win uniqueness on the affirmative if you're going to link turn a disadvantage, and then kicking out of arguments and how to win a clean turn. And I haven't really talked about the mirror image, how you can turn the case, turn the solvency, turn the harm, and how uniqueness plays into all of that. Maybe that'll be a future video if that's something that you find yourself dealing with and you get confused about. But this ought to be enough if you're not familiar with the interplay between different kinds of turns and takeouts to get you started. If you have questions or want me to give more examples or explain any part of this further, shoot me an email and we will see what we can do.